Hi, everyone. I'm Kerry Cassidy again from Project Camelot, and I'm here with Tony Gosling. And he is a former, I believe, BBC reporter and investigative reporter. And he has been on my show over the years, but we haven't talked in quite some time. So it's wonderful to have you on the show again, Tony. So much has happened since we last connected, I think. So why don't you just talk about what you've been up to? Give yourself a brief introduction,
Mm.
and let's just get into it.
Well, yes. So I was a radio journalist at the BBC in 1989, 90, right through to 90. And this is like an eon ago for many people. But it was a fascinating era, Kerry, because the BBC had been an extremely good organisation up till the early 90s. And the Thatcher government, uh, at the bidding of Victor Rothschild, who was still alive in the 80s, said to Marmaduke Hussey, who was the BBC chairman in 1987, can you sack the Director General? So the BBC Director General was sacked by Marmaduke Hussey, who was the chairman. His wife was the Queen's chief lady in waiting. So this is how the feudal system works. Yeah. So and this tracing this decision to get rid of the chief editor of the BBC, who'd been very independent minded, very critical of the Thatcher government. It was Victor Rothschild. Victor Rothschild is the fifth man. He was after Burgess, Maclean, Philby, Anthony Blunt. Victor Rothschild. If people are interested in the whole Cambridge spy thing,
I am.
Roland Roland Perry, the Australian writer, who's now he's kind of semi-retired. He's still writing, but he teaches at Melbourne University journalism. Roland Perry's book, The Fifth Man on Victor Rothschild's Life, is an unbelievable, rip-roaring read. He had so much trouble in London, he went back to Australia after he'd written it. But because Victor was a Labour peer, he was in the House of Lords. He was advisor to Edward Heath, Harold Wilson, Margaret Thatcher. All of the top government prime ministers were being advised by, not by the Rothschild family, by Victor specifically. And he
Okay.
was a Russian spy, so it was not a
Right.
Russian spy, a Soviet spy, just to get the terminology. Anyway, so the BBC had changed so much in the time I was there. I could see, you're looking around, the wallpapers changing, the best people are being pushed out, elbowed out, and nepotism was really starting. And so the actual standard of the production staff was going down off a cliff, really. Whilst we were still there was a fantastic amount of sharing of knowledge and journalism and a lot of honesty amongst the people who were working in London at the time. And this was just radio I was working in. So, Kerry, it was a terrific experience. And I think for many people who are just kind of doing things like blogging and alternative media now, there is something quite. We had the biggest audience of any radio station in London. We're called Greater London Radio. And when you're broadcasting on a station like that, you've got to get it right. You've got nearly a million people most of the time listening to, with the radio on in the background. And so you want to, your reputation is made or failed on whether you've actually checked your facts and whether you've got the nous to know that what you're saying is correct. So anyway, we were nobbled. We were nobbled. The BBC was nobbled. All sorts of people from private industry came in, started to and many Zionists actually. I had a senior producer suddenly take over who was a raving Zionist, and she was from the private world. So we were all public servants, effectively civil servants. So that was that's my big sort of introduction to mass media. And so back in it was around about 2008, the time of the financial crisis. I sat down with some friends and we said, look, this is absurd. What's going on here is the whole destruction of democracy, the principle of democracy, the idea that the people should have a government that can actually do things to, that aren't commercially viable. For example, setting up things like youth centres, running infrastructure at cost, things like the government run railways, the electricity supply, the water supply. Now it's all, of course, being sold off. we were part of an era where these things actually worked, and so I started in 2008. I started a weekly radio show here in Bristol, in England, which is an interesting city in that this is where John Cabot set off from in 1497 to so-called discover North America, and that was the beginning, of course, of this new world order, or the United States. And now, of course, we're getting that in Europe. We're getting the United States of Europe. So it's an interesting spot to be, Bristol, and we've got a very good, I think, alternative culture here, based around the summer festival scene. Glastonbury, which has become horrifically commercialized, but there are lots of traveling people, vehicle dwellers, they sometimes call themselves, but people who are sort of mobile, and they tend to winter out in Bristol and then spend the summer on the road. So it's, I think, a terrific city to live. We've got such a lot of, it's a temple of port as well for its sins, like Edinburgh and places like that, and London, of course. And so it's got a lot of history, but it's also got a terrific, I think anyway, terrific cultural life, Kerry.
Okay, so now as far as where you are right now with the world scene, because we agreed that we want to talk about that.
Yeah.
Why don't you just start wherever you'd like to start with that?
Look, we've got all these crises, okay? Here in the UK, one of the big things is the migrant crisis. So we've got something like every 3 years, another million people coming into the country, many of them just on student visas or because the wages that businesses would have to pay them are less. And of course, it would be easy to stop them if they wanted to. They don't want to, because this is bringing down wages. It's also like two fingers up to Brexit. So it's saying, well, you've had Brexit, but look, all these migrants are like goods and services. We can just move them around wherever we want. And so that is,
well, okay, what about
thing.
all the hotels being packed with Ukrainians, for example, in England?
Well, it's not just Ukrainians. Yes, Ukrainians, obviously. I've noticed myself quite a lot of Ukrainians around. Not so many Palestinians, funnily enough, even though, of course, they are in a far, far worse and more difficult situation over there. But that's just one crisis. I'm giving you an example of the migrant crisis. We've also got the cost of living crisis, the economic crisis. We've got a crisis in Ukraine, and we've had you could call all these things. But there's a I think very important pattern that's developed, very obvious to me, through all of these things, and that is this summed up best by this term accelerationist. So the accelerationists are a group. It's a philosophy, really. It's the sort of thing which is embraced by people like Yuval Noah Harari, although he doesn't really broadcast it much. I would just suggest, that there is this. It's a kind of where extreme communism and the far right meet. So the idea is we are just going to tell the public what to do. But what they're accelerating is interesting. The accelerationists want to bring about the end of the world. Well, they say that, but really what this is the biggest crisis possible. So the accelerationist philosophy is you create a crisis and you make sure that the solution, rather than sorting the crisis out, makes it worse. Right? So, is the solution, yeah, but it isn't, right? It's going to make things worse. So this is another example of, for example, in the United States and the UK, they're now starting to increase over the last year or so, maybe 18 months, interest rates. This will make the cost of living crisis worse. It's going to increase inflation. So these sorts of solutions that are going to make things worse.
Well,
this is the way these people operate.
It's known as problem reaction solution, and David Icke made a big deal about that years ago. So it's still the same, formula, if you will. But in your case, you're talking about the ones that actually want to send it down a dark path. And we certainly are seeing that at this time. There's a real push for a totalitarian, Nazi-run world government. obviously through Klaus Schwab and the whole thing. So you go to Bilderberg, right? And you sit
Yeah.
in those meetings. Now, how do you do that? You are an investigative reporter, but do they let you in, or
No,
are
look,
you outside?
no, Kerry. I do not sit in the meetings.
All
What we
right.
do is we photograph them as they're going in, and actually, there's a whole bunch of us, I guess, maybe a couple of dozen over the years of people who've really gotten together, particularly in Europe. When the meetings are in Europe, it probably will be this year in Europe somewhere. Where at the moment we're trying to figure it out and guessing where it's going to be in sort of April, May time. But the point is, you have to photograph them as they go in and out. First of all, these quite often you can just sell the pictures of the people. Oh wow, look, Henry Kissinger's obviously he's disappeared now off the scene. But you got these rich and powerful people coming in and out. But the thing is, what is so I find so fascinating about this is sometimes you get a picture and we're sitting at the hotel in the evening, we're going, oh, who's this guy? I think he's with them. And we have to go through online to try and figure out who on earth it is. They're not on the list. They're completely, and
Okay.
it turns out, for example, last time, I think his name's Josh Friedman, who was with us, did an article about the guy. He's the chief guy for the accession of Sweden to NATO, working for the Swedish government and the Swedish military. There he is at the Bilderberg conference, just an anonymous face, no announcement that he's actually there. But of course, this is what it's all about. They're bringing these countries into NATO. It's a military political lobby
Sure.
where what they're doing is essentially they have been, and they've been going ever since the 1950s, remember,
Hmm.
bit by bit. And I think they've now reached a stage where they do control all of our politicians, really. So they make sure that there is no politician who's going to get in the power in any of the NATO countries or countries that are coming into NATO. That's not one of their puppets. And they've been extremely successful, Bilderberg, in doing that with their toxic mix of the biggest, most powerful banksters, corporations, royalty, of course, as well, are also in there.
Sure.
The mass media people, the owners, not necessarily the actual day-to-day editors, the people that actually own the media mostly are there. And what they're really doing is they're just making sure that anybody that is coming along as a potential leader, they're just checking them over. This person will do as we say. Yeah, they are completely wedded to being controlled by money and blackmail. Yes, they're able to speak, and it's a way of introducing them to the secret rulers of the Western world, if you want. It's like schmoozing them, say, look, with a cozy club of people, we'll look after you. It really is a sort of top level NATO mafia, Kerry. That's the way I see it.
Sure. Well, yeah, it's almost from my point of view, it'd be a coven, a large coven.
Well,
Just
yeah,
to
there's
say
maybe a
it
few
like it
coming.
is.
Yeah, so that's the steering group, I suppose, who are the
Yeah.
people that make the decisions about. I
Yeah. I
mean,
mean,
Henry,
very
yeah, go on.
diabolical ambitions, and
Yeah.
they're not shy about announcing them to the world. So we just had a meeting that happened, right? Was there anything that stuck out for you in particular? They're really focusing, I
Well,
think, on AI and
yeah, exactly
the
right.
future.
AI. It was all about AI largely, anyway. I mean, there was all this stuff about growing NATO, fighting Russia, Ukraine, all this sort of thing. But
Yes.
but it was all over the news, all over Europe and the United States during the Bilderberg conference. And yeah, because they see this as they've been talking about this whole idea of bringing AI in, and they were switching it on, switching it off, testing it basically. This was one of the reasons why NATO was encouraging the Russians to invade Ukraine, was so that they could really, test this out on the Ruskies.
Yes. Testing weaponry is a huge part of the Ukrainian situation. I always thought that and did report on that. Uh, Now, I don't know if you're aware of the Russians going into underground bases. There's a huge network under Ukraine. Are you up to speed on all of that?
Well, you mean Russian-built bases?
No, actually occupied by the biolabs. Don't you remember the
Oh
story?
yeah, yeah,
All the
yeah, of
biolabs
course.
underground,
Oh, the
and
biolabs. Yeah, that's
And a
that's
lot
most
of that
definitely
stuff was interrupted basically, but they were doing experiments on the Ukrainian people who a lot of them have now come across the channel and actually invaded your country. So what you're going to look at is people that have been possibly even not only experimented on, but perhaps carriers and genetically re-engineered in one way or another to bring a certain change in the population. And so that's going to affect Britain in a big way in the future. These are things they don't talk about, of course.
no.
And then I also, I don't want to take too much of your time today, so I want to kind of jump from topic to topic,
Yeah,
and
fine.
certainly feel free to bounce back to other things
Mm.
if you didn't get a chance to say what you want. But I'm also curious what your take is on this latest situation with Iran, with the hit in Jordan. Do you think the Iranians were as involved as the news out there is trying to say they were? What's your take on all of that?
Well, it's a bit like, say, the Nazis invading France and Britain taking an interest. Listen, I mean, these people are neighbours. They're not quite next door, Yemen and Iran, but they're very, very near. The British obviously were behind the creation of Saudi Arabia in the Sykes-Picot Agreement, and so that's their little monarchy that they set up, rather like the Israelis, the Crusader states over there. And so these are the local indigenous people. They're not the puppets or the backers. Having said that, the United States and Britain, particularly, are behind Israel. So we happen to be 4,000, 6,000, 8,000 miles away from Israel. They're next door to their, and this is the region that we're interfering. I think it's maybe, the pertinent question is, what are we doing in the Middle East? What have we been doing? The that started in October, we're now looking at, a particularly horrific. I mean, it's bringing hell to the Holy Land. I was just chatting to someone today about this, and what we've created in Gaza with this now nearly 30,000 by the Israeli Army Defense Force in this.
Extraordinary.
I mean, is what you've got is you've got parents who are looking at their children in the knowledge that they cannot protect their children, and you've got the kids staring back at mum and dad crying. So what have we what how are we allowing this sort of thing to go on? Well, the answer is it's not about just about land. It's about good and evil. And it's what the Israelis and the British and the Americans and anyone else that's involved in this, and there are some others, but it's mainly the Anglo-Zionist sort of axis, is wickedness. It's evil. It's biblical, really, in terms of the.
Well, yeah. So how does I don't know what your situation is in terms of whether you get intel from sources. Do you have intel from sources?
Well, I do have. Well, actually, my Gaza source, I'm afraid I cannot get in touch with her anymore. I used to get bits and bobs from her. But I mean, I've got a particularly good source in the West Bank. So, I mean, I'm
Okay.
always chatting with people over there about
Well,
what's really
okay.
going on.
And what about down in Egypt? Because it's very interesting, the push to get them, down to the south of Gaza, and then to bring in this canal. I'm sure you know the Ben
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Gurion Canal and all of that. And the fact that they're actually just, I mean, it's kind of mind blowing that the main part of what people think of as the American government, which I'm part of what's called MAGA and that whole thing. So I don't back any of this stuff. Neither does Trump, really. So there's an issue there, and how it's going to be resolved with or without Trump getting into office, I don't know. But we're in this very horrible stalemate on a certain level. So anything that kind of shakes loose in the Middle East is almost welcome at this point, because the trajectory is so dire for the Palestinians, and they're being obliterated. And as a state, certainly. So there's not even, some people are saying two-state solution. There's almost not another state anymore. There's a pocket, and it has been a prison system. I guess you know that, right? The Gazans have been in a prison for all intents and purposes. They had to have passes to go, in and out of Gaza and so on and so forth.
Yeah. So, I mean, the 7th of October was a prison break.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. So, and yet lots of people came out, they demonstrated in the streets of all the different countries, basically trying to protest this situation. But the militaries have been completely oblivious and just going along with it. So I know Turkey is moving troops into the area right now. I guess you've heard that, right?
Well, of course, it used to be Turkey. Up until the British turned up in the First World War, just, this is all Ottoman. I'm sure Erdogan is looking down there, at old-fashioned Phoenicia, and which is now Lebanon, and thinking to himself, well, actually, it would be rather nice to have that back after the British pinched it from us. And of course, it is a very much a British project. I was going back through the time scales. It's unbelievable, really. The Battle of Gaza, the British General Allenby pushed all of his soldiers up. They lost about 100,000 men on both sides with the Turks, and that was in September 1917. And then they finished the battle, and he pushed up, and he got pretty much level with Jerusalem. So he was kicking the Turks north all the time. And that was after, of course, after the Americans had come into the war, right? So the Americans came into, leaving loads of British troops and Commonwealth troops, the New Zealanders and the Kiwis, to fight to push the Turks out of the Holy Land. And then at the end of that year, at the end of that campaign week in September, the Balfour Declaration was published in the London Times. So it's like, you've taken half of the Holy Land, now let's publish the Balfour Declaration. Well, the next year, the Battle of Megiddo, they kicked the Turks right out, all the way beyond Damascus, in a couple of weeks. And at the end of those couple of weeks, they signed the armistice with the Turks.
Well, it was. Goes back. This is Lawrence of Arabia. It's depicted in a movie, and it is a partition. It was a partitioning of an area that didn't actually have borders at the time.
That's right.
They were tribal people, and they did actually move around. So they did have some of their territories, but
Lawrence was on the side of the Arabs, and he was doing these guerrilla actions against the Germans, etc., in and around Palestine area. And but the point is that and then say, well, this is a religious war. Why don't we just all become like New Age Luciferians? Because this is the way people really want to be. These religions have just caused so much trouble. Let's bring in and this was
this is the danger, of course.
Yeah. I think that's what I mean. I don't know about you. I think I'm looking at what's going on, and I'm seeing all this stuff from 1871, Pike's plan. In fact, you know what? I first heard about that plan, and I couldn't quite believe it. I thought, no, this is nonsense. It was from a friend of mine who'd been out living with the Bedouin, who are the sort of the Arabic kind of gypsy characters, the nomadic traders. Sure. I mean, there's still quite a few of them around out there. She'd been staying with them for a few months. No, well, actually, maybe 18 months. And she got to speak Arabic and everything. And she came back and said, oh, they're raving about this guy, Pike. Who's he? It's almost like, if you can imagine, Kerry, sitting around a kind of gypsy fire, chatting to the people that really know what's going on. And they're not beholden to anybody, and then they'll play a little song for you. But that I think is what we're dealing with today.
Well, I've traveled in the Middle East and in Jordan, and I have actually sat around even in Jericho with both sides, and so I can say that I know exactly what you're talking about. It is fascinating. I mean, I kind of made friends with people. Some officials at the Egyptian airport who let me in their backdoor area to talk to me. It was really interesting. Nobody does that, of course, but they break.
Most people don't. No, people like you and I do. and you understand that actually there is this kind of undercurrent almost everywhere you go. There's the
Yes.
official version. You know what? You can do exactly the same with the Israeli archaeology departments and
Sure.
the universities over there, because there is this official archaeology, which they don't, is the sanitized version. If you go down, to have a proper chat with them, they will tell you, yeah, well, actually, this is
Right.
what's really, and
No,
they love it.
that's true behind the scenes in Egypt as well. I take tours to Egypt, and I have, some very interesting conversations. But they're afraid. These are totalitarian governments. They don't tell you that, but behind the scenes, Egypt was a totalitarian forever, and we were
Definitely.
told behind the scenes, nobody can talk. If they're caught talking, you just disappear the next day, so to speak.
Yeah,
So
you have to be quite subtle about it. It's a bit like the
yeah,
old Soviet Russia, isn't it?
yes,
You got to be quite careful, otherwise the KGB or the NKVD are going to feel your collar. But
yes.
anyway, thankfully, we have. I think one of the things I'd like to say a bit about the UK, which is big for us, is the. I know you're over here quite a bit, but when the Queen died, many people might think, oh, it's just a load of stupid British. Actually, it was almost like a kind of total change in the country, a very strange mood. And I don't know if you saw much of the coverage, but there were tens of thousands of people that actually came out to line the streets to see the Queen's coffin taken from London down to Windsor, and King Charles, bless him, first of all up at Windsor. I don't know if you saw the footage of the Masonic, this kind of thing that the police were doing up at Windsor. Sorry, at Balmoral in Scotland. But yeah, so I mean, this is what the police don't do salutes like that. Yeah, but anyway, that's what they were doing. Anyway, so he flew his mum down in the coffin, and which a lot of people were annoyed about, because people were actually kind of thinking, oh well, they're going to drive her down and we'll be there. But the point I'm trying to say is that she was a very, very different character and personality to Charles. Charles wants to be in charge. He thinks he knows best. He's extremely political, and his mum
Well,
wasn't.
I'm actually hearing a completely different line of reasoning. What's
Go
going
on
on
then.
with Charles? He's actually abdicating the throne at this time. He's turning everything over to William, although they may be a stand-in for a time. But that's what I'm hearing. I'm hearing he's actually,
Look,
but
okay, so
I can
so
tell
let me
you
just.
that he never wanted to, at least what he has said, and the actions behind the scene are that he is absolutely turning over the throne. So
I think
you
what you're
should see
saying. Sorry,
ramblings of
I
that.
think what you're saying is a myth. It's a myth. It's a myth
No,
put out by his lot. He really does want to be in charge. He's waited his whole damn life to be in charge, and now he
well,
is in
that's an
charge.
interesting
Look,
line of
look.
investigation.
Here's an example, right? Here's an example.
All right.
Remember Sunday, we have every 11th of November, remembering where they never remember anything. They forget all the lessons they've learned from all. And you've got King Charles stood there. Behind him is Rishi Sunak, Prime Minister, and David Cameron, former Prime Minister.
All right.
So at the end of the ceremony, and of course, Sunak is Goldman Sachs, right? He's a little good boy. He'll do anything he's told, but he's really Goldman Sachs. He's not Tory, Labour, British, or anything. So they then go off into there's a great big door next to the cenotaph in Whitehall, which only opens, I think, that once a year when that ceremony is, and it goes. They go in for lunch at the Foreign Office. They all march in, and these three sit down and have lunch together. So the next morning, they announce David Cameron is going to be Foreign Secretary. So the press will go, oh, well, there was no leaks about this. And I said, well, of course not. It's because they only decided yesterday. And the Sunak, Charles, and Cameron are all in there. Cameron is a big pro-Israel person. He was one of the patrons of the Jewish settlement funds, for example, which is all illegal. And obviously, he also helped arrange the destruction of Gaddafi, the invasion of Libya, and all that stuff. So he was the perfect guy to have. Anyway, so
So okay, so you're saying that Cameron is the foreign secretary? Is that what you're saying right now? Oh no, did you get cut off? Oh God. Okay, I think we are live again,
Wow.
um, and so yeah, so go right ahead, Tony. If you want to pick up where you left off,
Yeah,
or
well, we were before we were rudely interrupted by my battery draining from 40% down, even whilst the phone's being charged. Let's just leave it at that. The was we were talking about Charlie. We call him Tampon Charlie. I don't know if you you know what we're talking about. Most of the world remembers the tapes that were released probably through MI5 at the time, which was the sort of rival factions in MI5, some of whom supported Diana and some of whom supported Charles. And the famous tape of Charles talking about wanting to be a tampon when he was chatting with Camilla. So this is back in the early 19 or mid 1990s. So Charlie, I think, is he's very much in charge. If you think, of course, he's also extremely active in this whole zero carbon movement, which is this attempt to create an entirely new economy to control world energy and basically to control people's use of energy. So to turn it into not just a sort of world market in oil, coal, gas, whatever, but an entirely controlled energy market. So you will only have a certain amount. This is very much like the Chinese social credit system. So Charlie is at the apex of that and always has been, actually, right the way since the Rio Earth Summit. So, he's quite an important key figure. His main organization, I believe he operates through, is called the Order of the Garter, which we now have his wife, Camilla, who the Queen didn't really want. She didn't go to their wedding. I don't know if you know that. When Camilla and Charles finally got married, the Queen refused to go because she said, this woman, because you cheated on Diana, you cannot actually have this woman properly officially as the Queen, because you cheated on Diana. If Diana had cheated on you, fine, but this is the way the Queen saw it when she was alive. So you see, he's not only involved in this very much in the foreign policy issues around helping Sunak appoint Cameron. He's also extremely involved in this whole climate business with Klaus Schwab and his buddies at the World Economic Forum, which is, of course, is where the Chinese and the Americans come together there as well.
Yes. Well, from our perspective, he is a pedo, and so is the entire royal family, reptilians, basically. And I don't need to go too much deeper into that. I think
look,
we
hang
might
on.
get
So,
thrown off the air here.
let me pick you up on that, because Andrew is an interesting character. Prostitute, basically, who was, I think she was 17 years old. Am I right? This is normal. I mean, it's not illegal, but the point of this whole Epstein operation was to blacken the names of anybody that's to do. The idea is everybody is looking at who's been under the Epstein umbrella, and they're being blackmailed. And they all look at Andrew and say, God, if they can do that to Andrew, what will they do to me if I don't toe the line? So it is a Mossad based, I think Mossad anyway, bot based blackmail operation there.
Sure, but with with actually some reality behind it. But I think that maybe you are not sort of I don't know whether you're read into the whole Satanism, and England has been front and center in the whole satanic movement, of course. So for eons. Oh yeah. And so you've never gotten into the occult and
I do see a lot of these things as ultimately satanic, particularly Freemasonry.
Yes.
And things like the Order of the Garter. I think I would use, and even the British Army Council, which is always made up of Freemasons. This is the little organization ever since Cromwell, which has run the army. So this is, I think, ultimately satanic. But I'll be interested to see why you think it's so focused here in Britain.
Oh, well, it goes way back into the occult and all of that. Aleister Crowley, you name it, the dark magicians, and also centered in France, down in south of France. God, what do they call it? The like, I'm drawing a blank right now. the P2 Lodge, is it?
Oh, in Italy, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's right.
No, well,
Absolutely.
there's a base in France. Anyway, and there are these witches, and the whole Illuminati is actually the whole government's run by behind the scene by these dark magicians.
Yeah.
And
Well,
if you've ever
I'd
gotten
agree
into
with
the
that.
occult,
And it doesn't have to be something which is weird and controversial. You just look at the P2 scandal in Italy, you'll find the chief fascist
yeah,
Licio
the P2
Gelli.
Lodge, but it's
Yeah,
actually they have a base in southern France.
but this is the thing is with the Italian lot, it was all exposed in the on the newspapers and everything over there, so you could see it. It's almost like a kind of
One of my
a
witnesses,
spotlight.
Leo Zagami. Are you familiar with him?
Yeah.
Yeah. So he talks a lot about it. He's written many books about it. I interviewed him. I was one of the first back in the day to bring the whole thing public. But
hang on,
it goes into the. Sorry?
Did you know about the original writings of the Illuminati from the late 1700s? Actually, do talk about these propaganda lodges. I mean,
Yes.
it's amazing, really. If you look, there's
Oh, yeah.
people all across the world, all across the press.
Well, it has to do with burning at the stake of the Templars and I mean there's so many facets of it.
Yeah.
It's but be that as may, rather than go down that direction, let's just sort of acknowledge that it is part of and I have some witness testimony about this going way back as well. Anyway,
well, hang on, because
you?
Whilst we talk about the satanic,
and it has to do with satanic. Also, it has a lot to do with Israel. The background behind what is in the Khazarian mafia. It goes behind all of this. I mean, this is a whole big story. The adrenochrome, I call it the adrenochrome highway, goes to Hollywood. Goes, it involves the whole Epstein story, the islands, not just Epstein, but also Branson and others. Where these things are going on.
Yeah. Well, look. So we had a bit of a disagreement, didn't we, before I got cut off about accelerationism or problem reaction solution. And I think this, I really love to try and persuade you that this is really about and accelerationism is something which goes much deeper than this. I mean, Ike is quite right about the idea of this, but
I just don't use that word.
No, but they do
it the plan. It is the New World Order plan.
They do, and it opens a door to this whole Nietzschean philosophy, which is so important, I think, and also links back to Crowley. People like him, So that is what that is actually. Never mind what the problem, reaction, solution is. What we're seeing, accelerationism is what is creating those events. And the thing they're accelerating is Armageddon. That's their
yes. I think we agree completely on that.
And so there is a philosophical movement. Now, just to break it to you, one of my school friends in Southeast London at grammar school, Langley Park School in Beckenham in Kent, when I was 14, 15 years old, is this guy, Nick Land. Now, Nick is the father of accelerationism. So, I mean, this is something I've kind of figured out over the last couple of years, is that my old school friend, we used to call him, well, I didn't, I was more polite, but he was called Nick the Nazi at school. And he went on to do philosophy at Sussex University, and then on to be a professor or a lecturer anyway. He was a big fish in the philosophy world, in the Nietzsche philosophy world, at Warwick University, where he created something called the Cybernetics Cultural Research Unit, right?
Yeah.
So this brought in people from all over the world to look at effectively transhumanism, right? This is the idea of
and it also
people into machines. And this is, you've got Yuval Noah Harari now making millions out of writing books about this stuff, but Nick was one of the first. And I just found it crazy, Kerry, that and he was actually a really nice guy. He was a very dark character, right?
Oh, no.
But he was a brilliant guy to go to school with, because he knew far more than any teacher in our school, probably most of the lecturers in any of the universities. And
cybernetics got into Scientology. That's also where it comes from.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I mean, Nick is one of the people who's actually behind this. I mean, his writing is almost indecipherable, really.
Well,
And
Scientology is a huge, got hugely into the
look, I
intelligence
don't think he was a
agencies.
Scientologist. He's writing about turning
I'm not
everything
so
into
sure you can
computers.
separate the two.
Computers will run everything. And actually,
Yeah.
this is the best way to do things. So he's saying,
Well,
like
that's
we
where
had
we
the
are.
news this week with Elon Musk's first implant person, which I think should
Oh,
actually have been Elon Musk himself, but he's got some idiotic volunteer to have a brain implant. But this is
yes.
Nick. This is Nick and his accelerationist philosophies. And
All
if you,
right.
if you want to really get to grips with his stuff, don't read his stuff. Just look at what's going on. I mean, the person to read actually probably most useful is David Livingstone and his book about transhumanism.
I'm all, I report on transhumanism all the time. I mean,
that's right. Well,
the
David,
COVID
but
jabs
David
were
has
part
got
of
a
that.
really, David, I think, has got the really long take that goes right back to literally like 2000 BC, looking at this movement to control everybody, and bit by bit they've decided, and I think now they've just decided, right, we're going to go for it with
Oh,
with
it's
computer
huge.
technology, with AI, and we're going to
Yes.
have all these people as this is through owning nothing and being happy, of course. So
Of
everybody is
course.
going to be
Yeah, no,
completely like,
it's a package deal.
yeah, social credited. But the accelerationists are the people who devised the system. What I'm saying is that all power to Ike's elbow in pointing out this problem reaction solution. But there is a much bigger. If you take a step back from it, I think it's a much bigger transhumanist plan
Well,
in the
okay, but
background.
I report on transhumanism all the time, and I've got article after article about this. I've been investigating this, and one of my main witnesses, Captain Mark Richards, has talked a lot about this.
Well, you
So
should
I've
interview
really been
Nick. You
breaking
should
the
interview
story
Nick,
more than
Kerry.
most people.
See if you can interview Nick. I've tried. He won't do an interview with me, but you might be
What's
able
his
to
last name?
persuade him.
What's
Nick
his
Land.
last name?
Nick
What?
Land. Nick
Land.
Land, Land. And he's in Shanghai
Land.
now.
Okay.
He's over in Shanghai.
Well, I'll look
But
him up and see what we see about
he'd
him.
be
And
he if you can actually get him on, that would be fantastic. But the thing is that the ultimate aim is this massive conflagration. And I think we're getting closer and closer all the time.
so this
Yeah,
is
and
what we're
it's very
witnessing.
similar. I don't know what you make. I mean, it's very similar to the Crusades. It's almost like the Crusades. They didn't quite, succeed. There were a few years they had the kings, the Crusader kings in Jerusalem. Then they got booted out by Saladin and the rest of them. And the whole thing was a con anyway, from start to finish. It was loads of massacres going on, and a lot of it was to do with the war between the Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church at the time. Rome and Constantinople. But
Supposedly.
yeah, well, it was. I mean, there was. I mean, the Orthodox Church
Well,
was
it's
massive.
kind of like
Listen,
now,
hang on,
right
look.
now we're having these kinds
Constantinople
of
was
wars.
absolutely massacred by the Crusaders. Constantinople, they wanted to wipe out the Orthodox Church, and of course that kind of has moved to what is now Moscow, right? So that fight has not finished. Anyway, look, I know you want to wrap up, Kerry, but thanks so
Yeah,
much for asking me
so
on.
let's have you talk a little bit about your recent work,
Hmm.
any recent books, articles you've been working on, where your focus is right now, and if you want to throw in some more Bilderberg investigations, let me know. That would be
Yeah,
good.
well, okay. So just to wrap up, I've got these 3 books out now, ebooks, but 2 of them are also paperbacks. So one is
Okay.
it's called The Traitors of Arnhem, which is also a paperback. Now that is an investigation of the links between the British and the Nazis during the massacres there in Europe in the trenches. But then he was then getting involved with secret communications with Hitler's private secretary Martin Bormann
All right.
in 1944. So I did a whole book about that and looking at the Battle of Arnhem and why that was such a disaster. And the film A Bridge Too Far was such a because
Well,
they lost it.
how did you paint Churchill in the end? Did you see him as just a complex person, or did you see him part of the Illuminati and that their plans for changing the face of Europe,
Look,
etc.?
Dennis Wheatley, the great writer, deception planner during World War II, Dennis Wheatley, in his book *The Devil and All His Works*, I think it's 1972, has a little line about Churchill. He said, maybe Winston Churchill was a member of Adam Weishaupt's Illuminati,
I would not be surprised if it were so. Now, Wheatley knew Churchill, was working with Churchill. And the other thing is Churchill and Morton, who was really in charge? Because Desmond Morton lived at Crocken Hill in Kent, just not far from where I was brought up, and in a little house. And then a few years later, who turns up and moves in next door? Winston Churchill moved in to be next door to Morton. So you do wonder who was sort of in the driving seat, really. Anyway, that's really the links between Bormann and Morton, I think, are fascinating. The other books are more sort of, one is The Siege of Heaven Reader, which is just a kind of anthology of secret government, which I think everybody can sort of flick through. It's almost like a coffee table book, Oh, wow, look at this, And so that's all sorts of stuff to do with secret government, all the way from the English Civil War right the way through to the assassination of Diana. And, so I'm just trying to pick out all sorts of interesting, I do quite a bit on the Kennedy assassination too. I've got all the names of the people involved in that, the CIA, the Chicago, some interviews, some good interviews, which I hadn't seen transcribed up anywhere. The stuff I'd seen on TV, which I just typed up. Anyway, so that's The Siege of Heaven Reader. And then The Siege of Heaven is just a collection of my articles, include, I think, one of the latest was looking at and how it was actually Elizabeth I and John Dee that had this plan for the British Empire. So where did the biggest empire the world has ever seen come from? Well, it came from Elizabeth I, it came from John Dee, and actually the National Maritime Museum at Greenwich in London has dug out some of the original secret documents, the plans for the empire. And so I look at Cromwell's role in all that and the emergence of Freemasonry.
Well, I should really read your books because those are all areas I'm very interested in. Now,
as ebooks, I'm happy to send them out review copies to anyone that's going to give them a review. So
okay,
I'll just ping that over to you afterwards, Kerry.
Yeah, that'd be great. Now, what about this first one you were talking about, the one that focuses on Churchill?
Oh yeah, that's the Traitors of Arnhem.
Okay, now
the reason that the British through that battle, loads of Americans in Arnhem in September 1944. Was to give the Germans more time, to squirrel the wealth away around the world. And then right at the very end of the war, the guy, Bormann, who was the signatory on all the main Nazi bank accounts, was smuggled out of Berlin along with canals under the noses of the Russians by British commandos and to Desmond Morton, who was waiting in the British sector. And hello, Mr. Bormann, thank you. Right, let's have all your money and we'll give you a nice new life. And they kept him in Britain for a little while, but he ended up in South America setting up basically a Fourth Reich, a financial Fourth Reich. And that is also one of the two main books that I got most of this from. One is Op JB by Christopher Crichton, who was one of the
read that.
One of the commandos that went on that mission during the day and coming back and doing reports for Americans on the radio during World War II. And Paul Manning's book, Martin Bormann, Nazi in Exile, explains where the money went, really, where all this, and it was laundered through Sullivan and Cromwell law firm, the Dulles Brothers law firm in New York, all this $1 billion or so looted from Europe and put into these companies, which are the sort of Fourth Reich we're dealing with today.
That's right. Fascinating. Now, do you follow Michael Shrimpton's work at all?
A bit, yeah, bits and pieces. I've done some interviews with him over the years. Sure, yeah.
Have you? Yeah, because he's very much into the whole Nazis that have infiltrated the both governments or three governments, really, the Russians, the UK, and the Americans, but especially the UK.
Yes. No, I think he's right about Britain being infiltrated, definitely.
And he talks a lot about Canaris, as opposed to Hitler. So
yeah, there's I don't know if you're one of these people that buys into the Hitler survived the war theory. That all started once this book had been published. That all started once Op JB had been published, because it was talking about Bormann being protected by the British. And so I think, we'll have to agree to disagree on that, because I think they threw out all these Hitler survived things as a kind of cover for Bormann, because this stuff would get out about the British and the Nazis. But anyway, I just hope that, and I obviously didn't do this alone. There were various people that helped me along the way, Kerry. One guy particularly I ought to mention, Barry Wynne. He was a fantastic character. He was in the SAS in Malaya. He then came back to Britain and worked in ATV, which was one of the first independent television companies, on the Avengers series, doing publicity, doing publicity for them in the 1960s. And I got to know Barry, and he helped me with the research. He said because he knew one of the intelligence officers that had been involved in the Battle of Arnhem and had tried to stop the betrayal of all of the plans to the Nazis and been stopped, basically. And this Oreste Pinto was the guy's name, and so he'd actually had lunch with him, and he helped me on the way to to piecing all these bits of the jigsaw together about how deeply the Brits were involved in taking the money that the Nazis had looted from Europe and investing it into this new Fourth Reich.
Yes, absolutely. Now, can you spell the battle of, what's the last word?
Oh, it's the Traitors of Arnhem, Arnhem, which is this city in Holland, which the battle was centered around. Actually, the battle was mainly centered around Nijmegen, really, but it was about crossing the Rhine. If you can find that on if you go to bilderberg.org, you can get a link to buy it, or you can get.
Okay, I'll do that.
Yeah, you can get. No, listen, man. No, I'll send you a copy. You can get an e-copy, right?
That's fine too.
I even do free ones, which have got slightly degraded pictures in them, and you can just download a free one, or you can buy an e-copy.
I'm happy to buy an ebook if you have an ebook for sale over there. I'll do that too. So
it's all at bilderberg.org. In fact, everything is
all right. Excellent.
Where it's all based, yeah. And my weekly show, I ought to say, my weekly show is thisweek.org.uk, which we've got a show on tomorrow. Right. We'll be talking about allotments, because they're trying to destroy the allotments here in Bristol. The New World Order, the evil powers in the city are trying to kick people off their allotments. But then we'll also be going into a lot more of the serious national and international news as well, as we do every Friday.
Okay, very good. Well, I'm glad we got back in touch with you, Tony. Sorry for the rush to have to go to another show. I've already got that book.
That's fine. Look, listen, I'm sorry for my phone running. I've never seen it run down so fast. I mean, it was charging as well.
Yeah, they didn't want you to say some of the things you were probably about to say. So,
all right, love. Well, it's nice to see you again, and thank you for having me on.
Yeah, thank you for coming, and thanks everyone for watching and sticking with us. So I'll put the two pieces together, one show, and put it on Rumble. So stay tuned.
See you next time. Cheerio, folks.
All right, take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.